Hello, everyone. Hello again. I'm Dina Akesha, and today we are going to discuss quadratic inequalities. In the previous video, we discussed linear inequalities with all the details related to it. Today, we're going to discuss quadratic inequalities. Now, let's first highlight the word quadratic and explain what does the word quadratic mean. Because most of my students actually think that the word quadratic comes from the term, means four terms. But actually, no, quadratic doesn't mean four terms. Quadratic simply means an equation or an inequality with the maximum power of 2, x squared. Quadratic equations such as x power 2 plus 5x plus 6 is equal to 0. This is a quadratic equation. Why do we call it that? Because as you can see, the highest power of this equation is 2. Actually, we call it as well an equation from the second degree. Equation from the second degree. Okay, now we have quadratic equations and as well we have quadratic inequalities. But first, let's just have a reminder on how to solve the quadratic equation if you remember. There is a video related to quadratic equations. You can refer to it in case you have forgotten. Now I'm going to start with a very basic example dealing with quadratics. Now, if I have the following, x power 2 equals to 9, now the question would be find the value of x or find the values of x. Since the power is 2, that means that I will have two answers. Now, to find the value of x, I must use the inverse operation of power 2, which is square root. So طبعا احنا عندنا في مصر بيقول لك ايه وديها الناحية الثانية square root. ماشي فاحنا هنوديها الناحية الثانية square root. But I will find the positive and the negative root of 9. And of course, the values of x would be positive 3 and negative 3. This is basically how to solve a quadratic equation. Now, أنا ليه قاعدة بقول الكلام ده دلوقتي؟ مش علشان أنا بستعرض قدراتي في الquadratic equations، علشان لو انتوا أخدتوا بالكم في الفيديو اللي فات بتاع الquadratic بتاع linear inequalities قلنا إيه؟ قلنا إنه solving inequalities it's the same concept as solving equations. الفرق الوحيد بيبقى في الفاينل answer بس. فأنا ليه حابة إن إحنا بس نفتكر الكلام ده؟ لأنه when we are going to solve quadratic inequalities, we will use the same solving steps for quadratic equations. The only difference will be the final answer. The only difference will be the final answer. So if you have such an equation, this is what we did. Please remember that this is how to solve. And the difference between equations and inequalities is the final answer only. Now let's take another example. If I was given the following, x power 2 minus 3x, for example, equals to 0. And if you remember, how do we solve this quadratic equation? Now we solve this quadratic equation by taking highest common factor, if you remember, or actually by factorization. So if I take x common, I will end up with x minus 3 equals to 0. And since I have two items multiplied and the product is 0, either the first is 0 or the second is 0. Either the first item is equal to 0 or the second item is equal to 0. Therefore, your final answer is going to be 0 and 3. And these, if you remember, we called them the zeros of the equation. Now, why am I saying this بسرعة? Because there is a video related to quadratics. يعني في فيديو على quadratic equations موجود اللي عايز يفتكر quadratic equations كانت بتحل ازاي. Of course, we discussed as well the last part related to quadratic equations. Let me just do it in this gap over here, which is the quadratic trinomial. X power 2 plus 5x plus 6 is equal to 0. Now, if you remember, when we discussed it in the quadratic equations, we did it by factorization, mod factory. So we just need to factorize using the calculator, or if you want to factorize mentally, it's totally up to you. So your factorization would be x plus 2 and x plus 3. And of course, either the first again is equal to 0, so x is negative 2, or the second bracket is equal to 0, so x is negative 3. These are the two zeros, or these are the values of the equation without going into lots of details. Why am I reminding you with all of this? Because we will need this when we solve any quadratic inequality. Now, let me just give another reminder that with basic equations, ليه اسود ليه اسود؟ ايه النكد اللي انا عملته ده؟ سوري يا ولاد. Now with the basic equations اللي هم زي دول, you don't have to equate it to zero. It could be like this, and you just find the root, the positive and the negative root. طبعا this can be solved بطريقة تانية دي, اللي هو أنا ممكن أعملها كده, أجيب ال 9 الناحية التانية, which is equal to 0, and then I factorize x minus 3, x plus 3, وبعد كده I will get the same answer. بس مش محتاجين ال steps دي كلها هنا. And then by HCF, make sure that the right-hand side is equal to 0. Quadratic trinomial, make sure that right-hand side is equal to 0. Now, how am I going to relate this to quadratic inequalities? Okay, now let's look at the notes over here. If you're going to refer to my notes, I'm going to take these two examples and solve them, and then I'm going to solve all the questions related to quadratic inequalities. أخذ بس بق شاي بلبن. اللي متابعني عارف أنا مدى حبي للشاي بلبن. Okay, so I'm going to take these two examples. Now this is quadratic. I was solving simple quadratic inequalities. I'm going to take these two examples over here, and I'm going to solve them in the whiteboard. Now this is page number 110, page 110 in my notes. You can refer to it if you want any explanation. Now let's take this example over here, x power 2 less than 25. Okay, so the objective now, لا مش هستعمل يلو بقى, ايه اللي يلو ده؟ طيب فين ناخد ايه ناخد burgundy. Okay, so the question would say solve, actually mainly the question for inequalities is solve or find the set out the range of values of x. Mainly that's the question. Solve or find the set range of values of x. And as we said, if you remember in the linear inequality videos, in the word set of values, range of values indicate indicate an inequality. So we have two inequalities. x power 2 كانوا ايه تاني معلش عشان بس استعملهم هم less than 25 or greater than 16. تمام. Okay. So x power 2 less than 25, and then we have the other example, x power 2 greater than مثلا or equal to 16. Now we all know that the inequality symbols are either less than or greater than. طبعا ممكن تكون less than or equal, greater than or equal. Now let's see, how do I solve a quadratic inequality if it is less than? احنا هنشرح الإجابة ليه كده وبعد كده we're going to discuss it يعني briefly شوية. Now the first thing that you need to do is think equations. Think equations. Okay, if this was an equation, what would I do? If this was an equation, what would I do? If it's an equation, I will find the positive and the negative root of 25. So x would be equal to positive and negative 5. Positive and negative 5. Now, if this was an equation, then this would be your final answer. But no, this is not the equation. طبعا هم جابوا الإجابة دي mainly عن طريق الجراف, بس احنا مش هنقعد نعمل جراف علشان الفيديو ما يطولش قوي. I'm going to use the number 9. Now, these are my limits, اللي هم ال 5 and the negative 5. And if you remember when we discussed in the linear inequalities videos, قلنا دول سميناهم ال limits. These are my limits. And at these limits, if you remember, قلنا we put two things. We put a circle and we put an arrow. Okay, now let's start with the circles. Since there is no equal sign in my inequality, so the circles over here would be not shaded. The circles would be not shaded. Please بقى listen to this sentence carefully. The answer of a quadratic inequality is either the numbers in between my limits or the numbers outside my limits. What applies to positive applies on negative. So the answer will be either the set of numbers in between the limits or the numbers outside. How do I decide whether it's a number in between or outside? Let's start by outside the limits. Let's pick any number within this range. For example, the 6. And substitute in this inequality over here. The inequality is x squared less than 25. So let's substitute the 6 here. 6 power 2 is equal to 36. هل 36 less than 25? No, the 36 is not less than 25. This is an incorrect information, meaning that all the numbers that are greater than 5 do not satisfy the inequality. فده هنا الجزء ده لا. No, I don't want this part. What applies on positive, as I just said earlier, applies on negative. Let's pick any number over here, for example, -6. And substitute again in the inequality. -6 all squared. Please always remember to put negative numbers between brackets and outside. -6 power 2 is -6 times -6, which again is 36. هل 36 less than 25? No, 36 is not less than 25. فدول هنا برضو no, they do not satisfy the inequality. Fix. So the numbers that are outside my limits do not satisfy the inequality. طيب يبقى أنا كده ما عنديش غير the numbers that are in between. Let's pick a number and substitute and see whether they satisfy the inequality or not. And I already explained the meaning of the word satisfy, but in the previous video, اللي هو linear inequalities. The word satisfy mean when I substitute, the answer is correct. So let's pick any number in between. For example, 3, and substitute over here. 3 power 2 is 9. 9 is less than 25. So these, tamam, they satisfy. Let's pick a negative number and substitute. -3 power 2 is 9 as well. So these numbers as well satisfy the inequality. So basically, in less than questions, all the numbers that are in between my limits satisfy this inequality. طب يا مس فين الفاينل answer? Where is my final answer? لو فاكرين بقى في الفيديو اللي فات شرحت لكم يعني ايه C style inequality. The answer of a less than inequality is always a CC inequality. The first C stands for compound. The second C stands for connecting number line. The answer of a quadratic inequality is this. The number line is if required, and the algebraic answer, which is the compound inequality. X في النص، واحدة يمين وواحدة شمال. On the right hand side بكتب bigger value اللي هي 5 أو the bigger limit, and on the left hand side بكتب smaller number or the smaller limit, which is -5. And here goes your answer. دي final answer بتاعتي اهي اللي هي x between 5 and -5. طيب هل أنا كل ما هيجي لي مسألة less than هقعد بقى أقعد كده نص ساعة وسبستيوت والكلام ده كله وبتاع؟ لا. Let's go to the notes and practice on some, as you can see, less than questions. The final answer of less than questions is always a CC inequality. And the solving steps are the same as equations. Now let's pick all the less than questions and solve them together. Okay, so let's see this question over here. This is in your notes, page number 111. We're going to solve all the less than questions. يعني أنا أعمل إيه بقى أول ما تجيلي مسألة less than. Now first, let's all focus that the first thing you need to look at whenever you are solving a quadratic inequality is the sign. If it's less than, then automatically you know that this is a CC question. CC question, compound inequality, and the number line, if required, will be a connecting number line. دي أول حاجة أبص عليها الساين. لو less than يبقى دي مسألة CC على طول. And then now I need to show my solving steps. How do I solve a quadratic inequality? You use the same approach of quadratic equations. نفس الapproach. If this was an equation, then what would I do? Definitely, I will find the positive and the negative root of 9. The positive and the negative root of 9, which is positive and negative 3. You can write it like this, or you can write them separately. طيب, is this the final answer? No, this is not the final answer. If the question was an equation, then this would be the final answer. Then what is my final answer بقى يا مس؟ FA يعني final answer. The final answer is a compound inequality, which looks like this. X in the middle, less than هنا, greater than هنا. The bigger limit on the right, the smaller limit on the left. The smaller limit on the left. معلش أحيانا زي ما كنت قلت لكم بيحصل technical problems كده وأنا بكتب. So this is the final answer. If the examiner requires the number line, then the number line would look like this. معلش بس أحيانا بيهنك. معرفش ليه صراحة. Okay, technical problem. Okay, the number line would look like this. The 3 on the right-hand side of the 0, -3 on the left-hand side of the 0. Both circles in this question will not be shaded because there's no equal sign in the question. And as we said, the number line will be a connecting number line. So this is what we call the graphical answer, or if the question requires the number line. Meaning what? All the numbers in between 3 and -3, when substituted in the original inequality, will satisfy the inequality. فأنا بقى خلاص كل ما تجيلي مسألة less than على طول أحلها كأنها quadratic equation وبس بزود الCC في الآخر. يلا خلينا نحل كم مسألة إيه less than questions. دي greater than دي greater دي less than. This is a less than question. Let's see. أنا في الامتحان تاني أهو يا ولاد هعيد مش مشكلة. Okay, أنا في الامتحان. What is the first thing that you look at? The first thing that you look at is your inequality symbol. If it is less than, then immediately this is a CC style. وخلاص بقى شرحنا يعني CC style اللي هي X كده واحدة يمين وواحدة شمال. هنا the bigger value وهنا the smaller value, the bigger limit or the smaller limit. Okay, يبقى أنا I know already how does the final answer look like. Second, I start solving it as if I am dealing with an equation. As if I am dealing with an equation. لو دي equation. If this is an equation, how do I solve it? This is a quadratic trinomial. You have to make sure first that the right-hand side is equal to 0. Quadratic trinomial is solved by factorization. I must factorize 2 brackets and the product is equal to 0. You want to change it into equal to 0. You want to keep the inequality as it is. مش فارقة. You can keep the inequality simple. Okay. Now, if you remember, we factorize using the calculator mod 5-3. So on the calculator, mod 5-3, then the A is 2, the B is -5, the C is -3. Now I have 2 answers over here. X equals to 3, and the other answer is -12. Now, if you remember, when we put these numbers inside, we reverse. خدوا بالكم يا ولاد إنه دايما ال quadratic inequalities بتتشرح بعد ال quadratic equations. عشان كده لو في حد تايه معايا يتفرج على الفيديو بتاع الكوادراتيك equations الأول. And then negative half goes inside as 2x plus 1. Okay, so this is your factorization. These are my limits. Now, if you want to add an extra step of this, and either the first is equal to 0, the first bracket, or the second bracket is equal to 0, you can do that. Now, are we done? No, we are not done. This part is the solving steps. This part is the solving steps. The right-hand side will be the final answer. The final answer. Now, if this was an equation, I would stop at this stage. But this is not an equation. This is an inequality. So you must include the final answer, which is the first C, which is the compound inequality that looks like this. Of course, in this question, I will add an equal sign on my signs عشان السؤال أصله فيه equal. And then I put my limits, the bigger number on the right, smaller limit on the left. And then the other C is for the connecting number line. If you were asked to draw the number line, and as I told you in the previous video, the number line will be already drawn in your exam. You just need to put the circle and the arrows. Now the limits are here, 3 and negative half. Add the arrows, put a circle. Add the limits, put circle. Now in this question, the circles will be shaded because as you can see, the question includes an equal sign. And the number line will be a connecting number line between my limits. So the answer is this. So all the numbers that are within the highlighted part satisfy this inequality. So we did almost 3 examples now related to the CC questions. Now let's move on to the greater than questions. How do I solve greater than questions? نعمة من ربنا والله الشاي بلبن. Let's go back to the whiteboard and see. Actually, you know what? I'm not going to use the whiteboard. I'm going to use an example here in the notes. ويبقى ضربنا عصفورين بحجر. شرحنا من النوتس وفي نفس الوقت شرحنا greater than questions. أهو. So now, as you can see, I'm going to use another highlighter now for greater than questions. Greater than questions. Greater than questions. اوكي لا خليني اخد example عشان ده هيبقى فيه decimals. خلينا ناخد example خفيف الاول اللي هو كان اهو x power 2 greater than or equal to 16. Now these are the greater than questions. Okay, again same approach of equations. If this was an equation, then I would find the positive and the negative root of 16, which is positive and negative 4. Okay, and then let's draw the number line to see what is my final answer, or what is the set of values, what is the range of values that satisfy the inequality. Now I'm going to put circles over here. And of course, in this question, both the circles will be shaded. Why? Because there's an equal sign here in the question. Now, as we said earlier in this video, that the answer will either be the numbers in between my limits or the numbers outside the limits. How do I decide? Let's pick any number in between. أنا خلاص بقى, I'm not going to pick on positive and negative. I'm just going to pick one. وقلنا what applies on positive applies on negative. ماشي? So أهو x power 2 greater than or equal to 16. Let's pick any number in between. هنا مثلا negative 3. أهو. And square it. Negative 3 power 2 is 9. Is the 9 greater than 16? No. حاشا لله. Meaning what? All the numbers that are in between do not satisfy my limits. Do not satisfy my limits. ففاكس بقى the numbers in between. And let's pick a number outside the limits. وقلنا يا جماعة بقى what applies on positive applies on negative. So let's pick, for instance, negative 5. Oh, negative 5. And square it. حدش يقول لي negative 5 power 2 اصل انا يمس حطيتها على الكالكوليتر كده وطلعت لي negative 25. You must put the negative between brackets and the powers outside. Okay? So negative 5 power 2 is 25. هل ال 25 greater than 16? Yes. So the numbers that are less than -4 satisfy. What applies on negative applies on positive. The numbers that are greater than +4 satisfy the inequality. طب يا مس بعد كل الهري اللي انت عمالة تهريه ده, what is the final answer? Please listen carefully. The final answer of greater than inequalities is always the set of numbers outside my limits. Outside my limits, which I call them the نافورة style أو the fountain style. لو احنا رحنا شفنا أي نافورة, يعني أنا هحاول أرسم النافورة بتبقى whatever يعني شكلها عامل إزاي, بتطلع المية كده أهي, بتطلع كده. They look like the arrows of the inequality. So what is the نافورة style or the fountain style? The نافورة style is the answer of any quadratic inequalities with greater than symbol. طب where is the final answer بقى? The final answer will be two separate inequalities. The numbers that are greater than 4, x أكبر من كبير. طبعا we put an equal sign because there's an equal sign in the question. And the numbers that are less than -4 أصغر من الصغير. So two separate arrows with two separate inequalities. x أكبر من الكبير و x أصغر من الصغير. x أكبر من x greater than the bigger value و x smaller than the smaller value. أكبر من الكبير وأصغر من الصغير. Now, if you notice here that in the less than questions, because we had one arrow connecting them, I had one inequality. But in the greater than questions, because I had two separate arrows, so I must have two separate inequalities. Now we're going to focus on greater than questions. فأنا بقى إيه؟ اللقطة بقى في إيه زي ما قلت لكم. خليني بس أخد بق قبل ما يسقع. اللقطة بقى في إيه؟ إنه whenever you're dealing with any quadratic inequality questions, you always look at the symbol to know what is this question. Is it a CC question or is it a نافورة question? Which is, طبعا, if anyone doesn't understand my Arabic totally, which is the fountain question. How does the answer of the نافورة look like? X greater than the bigger limit, x smaller than the smaller limit. أو in other words, x أكبر من الكبير و x أصغر من الصغير. x أكبر من الكبير و x أصغر من الصغير. And please remember that you have two parts in the quadratic inequalities, the solving part and the final answer. فهنحل بقى دلوقتي كم سؤال كده greater than. Okay, now first, as we said, look, خلاص we determined that this is a نافورة question. Second, deal with it as if, again يا جماعة, as if it's an equation. As if it's an equation. So if this was an equation, I would move, please بقى ما تهنكش وخليك لطيف. I would move the 4 to the other side by division, and then I will square root. So x is equal to the positive and negative root. شوف بيعمل كده ليه صراحة هنا. 25 over 4 on the calculator. طبعا هي 2.5 بس يعني نتأكد. 25 over 4 it's 2.5. So positive and negative 2.5. طيب احنا كده خلصنا؟ لا كده ما خلصناش. ده ال working out. Now you still need to write the FA, the final answer. Okay, now the final answer of any greater than questions is divided into two parts, x greater than the bigger value, which is 2.5, or x less than the smaller value, which is negative 2.5. This is the algebraic answer. ودي لازم تتكتب في الامتحان، لازم، يعني ما فيش option ان انا ما اكتبهاش. I have to write it. Okay? And then there is the number line. If يعني the number line will be يعني مثلا ايه upon request. انا عايزه number line او انا مش عايزه number line. Put the limits. Okay? And then the circles. Now in this question, the circles are not shaded because I think ما فيش equal. No equal sign. And the نافورة اهو. An arrow to the right, an arrow to the left. طبعا in exams we don't do it like the نافورة كده. You draw a proper arrow. كده. Arrow to the right and arrow to the left. I guess it's nice, يعني. It's not that bad. So let's solve more questions related to quadratic inequalities. quadratic inequalities مهمة لأنه بتيجي كتير في الكالكولس. Okay. So now again my eye دايما حتى أنا بقول كده دايما scan زي السكانر كده. Scan. This is a greater than question or less than question. This is a greater question, which is the نافورة. وقلنا النافورة x greater than the bigger value, x smaller than the smaller value. Okay. Now and then what do I do? أنا هرقم الsteps. Step 1. لا أنا مش عايزة أخضر، عايزة لون تاني. Step number 1. I think اللي اسمه ايه ده هو المهنج اللي هو الابلكيشن ده اسمه ايه؟ Maybe I need to update it. اسمه ايه ده اللي انا فاتحه عليه النوتس؟ Edge. So ST1, step 1 is solve as if it's an equation. To solve as an equation, I will move the 1 to the other side by subtraction. So x power 2 is equal to 4. And then, of course, بقى خلاص قلنا مليون مرة positive and negative root of 4 يعني positive and negative 2. Okay, now the final answer. This is a quadratic inequality with greater than, so the final answer is divided into two parts. The algebraic part, x أكبر من الكبير و x أصغر من الصغير. طبعا since the question has an equal sign, so I must put equal signs like this. You want to separate by comma, you want to write or in between, it doesn't make a difference. And then the number line, put your arrows, sorry, put the limits 2 and negative 2. Both circles in this question are shaded. And remember, it's like the نافورة. واحدة يمين وإيه وواحدة شمال. Okay. أهو ده كده بالترتيب اللي هتحاسب عليه في الامتحان. Now بقى let's solve. You can actually pause the video and solve the remaining of the questions in the notes. And then check your answers if you wish. I'm just going to solve all the questions related to this part in our notes. Now, this is a question that came in 2014. It says, solve the following inequality. Now, what is the first thing that I would do, Dina? The first thing is that I would check the inequality symbol. This is a greater than question, so immediately دي نافورة. طبعا في الامتحان ما تكتبوش نافورة. ده كله في دماغكم جوه. It's all in your head. So, again, in inequalities, the first thing that you do, always check. Is this an نافورة question or a CC question? So this is a نافورة question. So x أكبر من الكبير, x أصغر من الصغير. X greater than the bigger value, x smaller than the smaller value. And then I solve as if I'm solving an equation with no difference whatsoever. I move the 4 by multiplication because fraction equal fraction, not fraction, sorry. You have to start by the 4 first. Or multiply 4 both sides. So m squared plus 3 is equal to 84. صح? 21 times 4, okay. And then move the 3 by subtraction. So you end up with m squared, 84 minus 3, which is 81. And then step number 3 is the final answer of this equation, which is positive and negative root 9. Root 81. أنا بعمل بالتفصيل بس. So of course the m is equal to positive and negative 9. Is this the final answer? No, no, no. This is not the final answer. The final answer, or step 4, is an inequality. Since this is a greater than question, so it's a نافورة, meaning I have two separate inequalities. دي لازم تتكتب في الامتحان. دي كده هنا ده ده final answer لو المسألة equation. لكن دي كده inequality فلازم نزود الحتة دي. عشان كده بقول لكم هو الفرق الوحيد بس ان احنا بنزود الفاينل answer. So M, please try and use the same letters in the question. Greater than the bigger value or the bigger limit, which is positive 9. M less than the smaller limit, which is negative 9. دي كده اللي بيسموها إجابة نموذجية. أخد عليها الدرجة كاملة. You don't volunteer in exams. If the examiner did not require number lines, then you don't do the number line. احنا بنعمل هنا number line عشان بس احنا بنشرح. Okay? So if you wish to do the number line, these are your limits. Both circles in this question are not shaded because there is no equal sign. مفيش equal. And then the نافورة, an arrow to the right, an arrow to the left. أنا بس إيه هعكس بس إيه دول عشان بس أوريكم إنه ده M أكبر من كبير, all the numbers greater than 9, وده هنا all the numbers less than negative 9. Okay? Not bad, I guess. So let's see. Where are we now? I think this page is done. خلاص, let's move on. ناقص لنا 3 questions. يلا, let's solve them together. Okay. Now I'm going to start actually with 7 and 8, and then I'm going to go backwards to question number 7. Okay. Now, the first thing that you need to do, actually, I'm going to do something. What if this was written بالشكل ده? يعني what if this was written as follows? 2 كده. What do I do in this case? Do I start factorization والكلام ده كله? Now, لا. When you're dealing with trinomials, quadratic trinomials, you must make sure that the right-hand side is equal to 0, other than the basic questions. So I will move the 2 to the other side first. يعني if I'm going to start with this, if I was given, actually في سؤال جه كده قبل كده. If I was given the inequality بالشكل ده, or even if I was given the equation بالشكل ده, then I must rearrange it. I will move the 2 to the other side by subtraction. So it changes into this. Okay, and again, that was discussed in full details in quadratic equations video. So this is a quadratic trinomial. Please, whenever you're dealing with a quadratic trinomial, or whenever you're dealing with quadratics, make sure that the coefficient of x power 2 is positive, okay? Now, what do I do at first? Look at the inequality symbol to determine the final answer. How does the final answer look like? So this is a greater than question. The right-hand side is equal to 0. So I have no issues. The quadratic term is positive. So I can immediately proceed with step number 1, which is factorization. Now, I know that some of you do the factorization mentally, but yani, in exams, you don't have to do it. We use mode equation 3. Mode equation 3. Insert your ABC. And then you have these 2 values over here. X is equal to 2. And the other is negative half. Now you have to insert these numbers in the brackets. And if you remember, we do it this way. You reverse the sign. So positive 2 changes into negative 2. And if you remember when we're dealing with fractions, the denominator goes as the coefficient of x. So it changes into 2x. The numerator goes here separately and reverse the sign from negative into positive. Okay. Now there is an extra step that we usually do in quadratic equations, which is when you have 2 brackets and the product is equal to 0, either the first bracket is 0, solve for x, so you get this 2 that we already got from the calculator, or the second bracket is equal to 0, solve for x, and you will get this negative half. Now, is this the final answer? Definitely not. The final answer, or actually it's not the final answer, لأنه في هنا عندنا اللي هي بتاعت الانتجر دي كنا قلناها في linear inequalities. Now, first let's write the algebraic answer and see. لا مش هكتبها FA لأنه هنا دي ما هيش بقى FA ما هيش final answer. Let's write the algebraic answer. Okay. Now the algebraic answer here, since this is the nafura, as we said earlier, is 2 separate inequalities, x greater than the bigger value, which is 2. And then the other inequality is x less than negative half. Now let's draw the number line. لا برضو بعكسهم. معلش. هعمل x less than the smaller, or x greater than the bigger. Now let's do the number line. Okay, I just do it this way so that you just try and relate. طبعا this question has no equals, so two circles are not shaded. X أكبر من الكبير و X أصغر من الصغير. Now, if this sentence was not written, then this would be your final answer. But this is not the final answer. Now let's see. The question here says, write down the smallest positive integer which satisfies the inequality. Write down the smallest positive integer which satisfies the inequality. We discussed this part in the linear inequalities video. Now, the word integer means whole numbers. I'm just required to find the whole numbers. Type, I have so many whole numbers, greater than 2, 3, 4, 5, and I have so many whole numbers. يا لهوي, -1 دي مصيبة. -3, -4, and so on. أنت بقى يا examiner, what do you require? I am required to find the smallest positive integer, meaning I am required to look at this part over here. Which is the smallest number? 2? لا, ما ينفعش. ليه؟ عشان ال 2 ما عليهاش equal. ما عليهاش shaded part, because the 2 has a hollow circle, so I cannot say that the smallest integer is 2. So the FA, final answer over here, the smallest integer that the examiner is talking about is 3. The smallest positive integer, which is 3. Question number 7 is done, and I guess it's quite not that bad. Moving on to question number 8. Okay, so let's do our checklist. في كده اللي هي checklist. تعالوا نعمل الchecklist. This is a quadratic trinomial. The quadratic term is positive. Checked. The right-hand side is equal to 0. Checked. This is not an equation. This is an inequality. Check the inequality symbol. This is a less than question. So this is not نافورة anymore. This is the CC style questions. CC style. عشان كده بقول لكم دايما من الأول خالص تحددوا المسألة دي ايه؟ CC ولا نافورة؟ ال CC is a compound connecting number line that looks like this. Okay. What are my solving steps? Factorize. And your factorization is less than or equal to 0. I guess even if you change it into equal in an exam, it won't make an issue. Okay, factorize using mode 5-3 or mentally as you wish. 1 equals 1 equals -6. بس طبعا I don't recommend at all in your exam to factorize mentally لأنه time وحاجات كتيرة كده وتوتر فمش طالبة. These are the zeros that we got, or these are the limits that we got from the calculator. So x minus 2 and x plus 3. If you wish to add this extra step, اللي هي قلنا either the first is equal to 0 or the second is equal to 0. Now, if this was an equation, then I would stop at this stage, but this is not an equation. So I have to move on to step number 2, which is in this case, my final answer, because the question did not require any integers or so. I already know that the answer is a compound inequality. I already know that the answer is a CC style. اللي هي كانت كده. كنوا نسيتوها بقى عشان قربنا نخلص الفيديو. Now, please put your equal signs. Remember to put the bigger limit on the right and the smaller limit on the left. This is the first C. Again, بس أأكد عليها اللي هي compound. And the second C is the number line. لأنه if you decide to draw the number line, or if you were asked to draw the number line will be a connecting number line بالشكل ده. If you want to make sure that your answer is correct, you can pick any number in between, substitute in the inequality, and you will make sure that your answer is correct. Even if you decide to pick the 0, 0 squared plus 0 minus 6 is less than or equal to 0 عشان دول مع السلامة. So here goes your question والإجابة النموذجية. Okay. هو في عندنا 9 مثلا ولا ما فيش 9 ولا كده ناقص لنا 6 بس؟ خليني كده أشوف. I think خلاص كده. خلاص السيكونس already ليها فيديو برضو موجود. Okay, let's move on to this question over here, which is the final question of the day. والله this question بقى شوية tricky ليه؟ لأنه إحنا when we discussed earlier at the beginning of the video, we said that we have the basic quadratic equations. We have the equations that can be factorized using highest common factor. And then we have the mode 5-3 questions. Now, this is an HTF question, but بصوا لي كده. هنا the quadratic term is negative. هنا the quadratic term is positive. فأنا what I would do in this question is that I would multiply the whole thing by -1 so that I change the quadratic term into a positive term, into positive. So it would change into بصوا أنا هعمل إيه الأول بس. I will rearrange it first because I really like the fact that the quadratic term should be written first. ما أعرفش عندي حالة نفسية في الموضوع ده. حب دايما ال quadratic term يبقى الأول. So this is just rearranging. And remember, when you rearrange, you don't change any signs. When you move across the inequality or across the equation, you change the signs. وزي ما اتفقنا هنا, my checklist says that I have an issue over here. لأنه the coefficient of x power 2 is negative. So what I would do in this case, I will multiply the whole thing by -1. السؤال ده رخم على فكرة. ما جاش حاجة شبهه صراحة قبل كده في الامتحانات برضو عشان ما بقاش كذابة. يعني ما جاتش ما شفتهاش بس يعني بنحب نقول الايدياز تحسبا. Now, if you remember what we said when we're dealing with inequalities, that if you multiply or divide by a negative number, this reverses. So this would change into less than. So you end up with x power 2 x power 2 minus 2x بالشكل ده. And this is a very, very important step. لأنه my advice is always try and substitute. هنشوف دلوقتي. Now, this is a quadratic equation. Quadratic term is positive. Checked. Right-hand side is 0. Checked. What do we check بقى دلوقتي? We check whether it's a نافورة or a CC. Now, this is less than, so it's a CC question. Now, start the solving procedure. هنا بقى I don't need to factorize. هنا I don't need to factorize. I don't need قصدي إن إحنا to use mode 5-3. هنا I will factorize by taking highest common factor. So I end up with x minus 2. X minus 2 equals to 0. Okay. Now, when we solve a quadratic equation by factorization, بالشكل ده, by taking highest common factor, it's either the first term equals to 0, so x is equal to 0, so this is one of my limits, or the second bracket, the second term, the second item is equal to 0, solve for x, so the x is equal to 2. So this is the second limit. This is my second limit. Now I still need to write the final answer. We already know that this is a CC question. So let's write the final answer over here. X هنا, واحدة يمين, واحدة شمال, 2 on the right, 0 on the left, and include your equal sign. Now let's check. صراحة أنا شاكة دلوقتي. Let's pick a number and satisfy over here. Pick 1 مثلا, for example, and substitute in this inequality over here. 2 times 1 minus 1 squared. طبعا 2 times 1 is 2 minus 1, which is 1. 1 is greater than or equal to 0. So my answer is correct. My answer is correct. برضو if you wish to choose another number, مش عارفة حاسة برضو إن أنا قلقانة كده. So I will use half. 2 times half minus half squared. And let's do it on the calculator. 2 times half minus half squared. The answer is 3/4, and 3/4 is greater than or equal to 0. So yes, my answer is perfectly correct. That's why I told you that this question might be a tricky question علشان the x power 2, as you can see here, is negative. So please, يا جماعة, do not forget to do the checklist, which is check the quadratic term. If the quadratic term is positive, then you have no issues whatsoever. If the quadratic term is negative, then what I did is that I multiplied the whole thing by -1. And as a result, I changed the signs of all the terms and I reversed the inequality symbol. So I had to deal with it as a CC question. Well, I hope that this video was useful and you understood everything related to quadratic inequalities. Thank you so much for listening. I hope it was useful again, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.